Palestinian leaders and intellectuals speak out. So we are honored to have two of the editors of that book. It's an incredible book, and I think if you don't have a copy, you can order a copy on Amazon, and I think PSC will have a copies of the book in the next coming weeks. But if they don't, you can order it off Amazon for about $29. It's worth having, and it's worth reading. You have different contributors basically sharing the different stories about how they see liberation for Palestine. Before I give the platform to the speakers, for those that are new to the Palestine Solidarity Campaign and would like to be members, please leave your details in the chat section, or you want to know about more webinars that the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign is organizing, you're more than welcome to get in touch with us, and we'll definitely get in touch with you. So as I mentioned, I have the privilege of having four amazing speakers today. One of them is Dr. Ramzy Baroud. He's a Palestinian American journalist, media consultant, and author, and internationally syndicated columnist and editor of the Palestinian Chronicle. I'm sure most of you have read it. Baroud has taught mass communication at Australia's Curtin University of Technology, Malaysia campus. Baroud is the author of 6 books and a contributor to many others. His books include My Father Was a Freedom Fighter, Gaza's Untold Story, and The Last Earth, a Palestinian Story. The last time I think Ramzy was here was in 2019, and he was here for a book tour for The Last Earth. And then we have Professor Ilan Pappe, who was born in Haifa in 1954 and graduated from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem in 1979 and completed his PhD at the University of Oxford. Pappe was a lecturer in the Department of Political Science at the University of Haifa from 1984 to 2006 and was forced to leave due to his support for the Palestinian cause. Pappe is the director of the European Center for Palestinian Studies at the University of Exeter, and he is the author of 20 books, among them, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine on Palestine with Noam Chomsky. And then I'm not sure if she's joined. We also have Ghada Karmi. She has a chapter in the book titled Key to the End of Zionism. She's a Palestinian physician, academic, and writer. She's a former research fellow at the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies at the University of Exeter, where she lectured on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Her major work has been in this area, on which she has published widely. Her books include an acclaimed memoir, In Search of Fatima, a Palestinian Story. And then lastly, but not least, Ronnie Kasrils is a former minister in the South African government, having served as the Minister of Intelligence, Minister of Water Affairs and Forestry, and Deputy Minister of Defense. He was also a commander in the ANC's armed wing, Mkonto with Sizwe. Comrade Ronnie, as South Africans like to say, is an accomplished author and public speaker. He is the Gauteng chairperson of the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign. I would like to give the floor to Ramzy to start the proceedings for us. Name, please unmute Ramzy. I think he's trying to speak, and for some odd reason, you seem to like silencing people. I don't know what that is, Naeem. I think it's kind of like your way of expressing your power. There we go, Ramzy. Thank you. And no. Naeem, Salim, Roshan, somebody please unmute Ramzy. If I could, I would do so.
Let me try. Sorry, I think I'm not quite sure what's happening.
Can't Ramzy unmute himself?
Yeah,
Yes,
no,
yeah.
I couldn't previously, but now I was unmuted. And I do agree with Mahalatsi, who had a lovely introduction there, that Comrade Naeem Jinnah is on a power trip, and that's why he's using the mute button as a way to control the rest of us. So I think, of course, it's great honor and pleasure to be speaking to you. I am quite familiar with the political discourse, more or less, in South Africa. I've been to South Africa several times, and I've met with so many people from different backgrounds and who participated in the struggle against apartheid in various ways. And it was a great opportunity to always learn. I mean, we kind of go to South Africa as if we are there to impart and to teach, but we actually end up being, learning a lot more than we could possibly impart and convey, because of the fact that South Africa is this, and this is not an attempt at flattery or romanticizing, but really it is in a sense a complete experience in terms of the nature and the ways that South African comrades, communities and people have fought throughout the years using so many different methods. Some worked, others didn't. They learned from their lessons. They unified at times, and they were not so united than others. And eventually they managed to kind of cross that triumphant line at the end of the day. But again, of course, there are still many problems that have been inherited from that racist apartheid regimes that are still being fought by the warriors of justice and equality and freedom in South Africa. So for us Palestinians, it's really been quite an incredible experience, a living experience, and a modern recent experience that allowed us to kind of really study, learn from, and exchange ideas throughout the years. And it's been of great benefit to our struggle in many ways. And I don't want to go into this too much because a lot has been written about it, and it's not exactly the topic of today's discussion. The topic of today's discussion is the Palestinians' own model of liberation. Some learned from South Africa, others from Algeria, Vietnam, Cuba, and so many different national liberation models throughout the global South and even beyond the global South. The question is, first of all, why? Why did we decide to put this book together? And it's not an easy question to answer, but I will give you a few clues of why we felt the urgency of composing this book. The first element is the idea that Palestinians are disunited. Palestine is divided between various factions with their political agendas, and we have nothing in common, to the point that the likes of right-wing extremist Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who could possibly be back in the next few days, has often made this claim on every political platforms in which he discussed the so-called peace process, in which he said, we don't have any partner. You want us to achieve peace, but Palestinians are not a partner. Palestinians are not united. And, I do believe that this emphasis on political unity among Palestinians over the years have taken place within that particular context, that of Israel and the Americans complaining that Palestinians are not united. And of course, every time Palestinians tried to get to be united, Israel and the US have done everything in their power in order for them to discourage them, or rather to torpedo any attempt at their unity. We remember what happened in the Mecca agreement between Hamas and Fatah, when they have reached an agreement soon after the elections in 2006, where Condoleezza Rice made it very clear to Mahmoud Abbas that if you form a unity government with Hamas, we will withhold funds from the Palestinian Authority. Mahmoud Abbas, as cowardly as he is, decided to backtrack and ditch the unity with Hamas. So it is this very strange, twilight, bizarre world in which Palestinians are urged to unite, and whenever they get closer that unity if all the parties around them do everything in their power to ensure their disunity. But in a sense, we were all caught in that dilemma, to the point that we started as intellectuals and activists talking about Hamas and Fatah must unite, Palestinian unity is absolutely essential. Well, in actuality, political unity during the times of national liberations is not something, a real feature that most national liberation movements enjoyed. This applies to South Africa as much as it applies to Algeria, as much as it applies to Vietnam, and so many other examples. So that's one point. The other point is the constant patronizing approach to Palestine through the need to find solutions. What is your solution, Ramzy? What's your solution, Ilan? What's your solution, Ronnie? We would never stand on a platform anywhere without us being asked to provide a political solution. And that is not just patronizing, but it also lacks deep understanding of how national liberation movements work. Political solutions is something you do once both parties feel that they have enough cards, enough leverage, that they can translate to a political action or to a political assets or outcomes. In the case of Palestine, we are nowhere near that stage in which we can sit as equal partners with Israel and achieve any kind of a political solution that may satisfy some degree of justice and freedom and liberation and human rights for the Palestinian people. And in my opinion, with all the respect to Yasser Arafat and that particular juncture in our history, that was one of the biggest mistakes in the Palestinian struggle and national liberation movement. And when we assumed in Oslo that we are at a position that would allow us to actually sit with the Israelis at the so-called negotiations table and achieve through so-called painful compromises this ultimate peace. And of course, that did not happen at all. And it didn't happen because the Palestinians had no leverage whatsoever and had no political wisdom that they could actually translate to anything meaningful. And a good example of that is the fact that all the fundamental issues, Jerusalem, the right of return for Palestinian refugees, the settlements and much more, was postponed to the so-called final status negotiations, which were supposed to happen sometime in 1999. It never happened. And instead, it created a new status quo ante in which the Palestinian Authority became the middleman, became the buffer zone between the Palestinian people and Israel. So in a way, Israel won more land, expanded on its settlements, carried out various forms of genocides against Palestinians, and at the same time secured some kind of practical and tangible support from the Palestinian Authority itself to rein in dissenting Palestinian voices in the West Bank and elsewhere. So to come and say, what is your political solution without us understanding all of these dynamics is wishful thinking. I can stand anywhere in the world and offer all kinds of imaginary, fantastic solutions that have no correlations with reality, and every single one of them is going to ultimately fail. The other thing is that the Palestinian people do not operate based on solutions per se. The resistance that is happening in Palestine right now, as we speak, it takes numerous forms and it has so many different facets, and they interact in the most elaborate ways, and we don't talk about it. A Palestinian woman from Al Khalil, Hebron, who tries to cross the checkpoint going through Qalandia, for example, to get to Al Quds to sell her produce in the old city of Jerusalem, to raise a family of children whose father was killed by the Israelis in a previous clash or previous intifada. That's a form of resistance. Palestinians just trying to get to their schools, to their universities, to their workplaces is a form of resistance. Resistance takes place in so many different ways in Palestine. And yes, with the mindset that this resistance will eventually be able to turn the tables and defeat Israel and roll back the colonialism and military occupation. Palestinians have that kind of dynamics, and they think around these lines as ordinary people, their intelligentsia, their prisoners, their support groups, their various grassroots communities throughout Palestine and even beyond Palestine. But we hardly talk about this. So the idea here, and that's kind of a long way of getting to the why, is we decided that instead of trying to present ourselves to the rest of the world as in an amiable way, as in we do have solutions, and I mean we have solutions, and we have an equivalent of of a Palestinian Gandhi, and we have the equivalent of Palestinian Martin Luther King, and to try to present ourselves in that sort of facade that may be convincing to the Western powers and so forth, we've decided to go back to the very basics. And the basics, as far as Palestinian intellect and intellectuals and community leaders and grassroots groups and leaders are concerned, is what Gramsci refers to as the organic intellectual and the engaged intellectual. Concepts and principles that are actually quite rife in Palestinian society. The idea that Palestinians actually don't have a leadership is not true. The idea that Palestinians have been cursed with a bad leadership is actually not true. We do have leaders, and they are great leaders, but these leaders have always been marginalized, pushed to the side, assassinated even, quite often imprisoned. And they have been absent from the scene. And the only ones who have been giving the space to present and to declare their right to speak on behalf of the Palestinian people are those who are enjoying the protection of the Israeli army, the VIP card holders, those who are perceived by the US and other Western polities as the moderate Palestinians, the Palestinians we can do business with, and that sort of thing. So we decided that it's not solutions that we are offering, but a path to liberation. And to do so, we can't just talk about politics or diplomacy. We have to talk about language. We need to talk about culture. We need to talk about media. We need to talk about every aspect of Palestinian society that serves a collective end at the end of the day, and that would eventually help Palestinians assert their identity and create a collective strategy that will eventually allow them to achieve that coveted liberation, freedom, and justice. And to do so, we sought the help of many engaged Palestinian intellectuals in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, the Gaza Strip, but also Palestine 48, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Australia, Canada, Chile, the UK, and so many other countries. People who have this kind of tried and true experience in struggle. Some of them have decades worth of experience, and many of them have achieved a great deal in their respective fields of study, of work, of charity, and so forth and so on. And we decided to bring them together, and this deals with the how. We brought them together and we tried to create some sort of a consistency in the narrative. And it really was a lot easier than we had earlier anticipated. We have reached or composed a list of over 100 engaged Palestinian intellectuals from Palestine and around the world. We settled on 30. We asked them to address a specific issue dealing with their respective area of study. And when the outcome, when we received the content, we were so not only impressed, but we felt that in some ways, even though many of them may have not known each other personally, many of them may have functioned and operated in different political and geographic spaces, yet somehow, even though many of them come from different ideological and background and of course geographic spaces, yet somehow they were more or less thinking around the same political lines, more or less pushing and laboring to achieve the same coveted end. And for us, in a sense, we actually discovered that unity that everybody keeps talking about is already there. That unity of Palestinian intellectuals, the engaged intellectuals, is there. The same way that you see the unity of the Palestinian people in the West Bank, in Gaza and elsewhere is already there. It's just they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to acknowledge it because it's not the kind of unity that is going to create the kind of political program that the Americans can deal with or the Israelis can accept and so forth. So the outcome was, it was really a fantastic exercise, intellectual exercise that we hope will serve as the beginning. And I hope that I don't get accused of arrogance here, saying why should this book to be the beginning of the discussion? There are many other attempts that tried to create common Palestinian platform, but the space in which this book covers from a geographic, ideological, political background is so massive. So the hope is we know now that we have all of this in common. Maybe now we can continue that conversation beyond the cliches and the stereotypes and the patronizing language and the unreasonable demands, so that Palestinians can take charge of their political discourse the same way that the Palestinian people in Palestine, as we speak, are rising and taking charge of their actual discourse on the ground in terms of resistance, in terms of popular mobilization, and much more. I think I'm going to stop here just in case I exceeded my time.
Thank you for that, Ramzy. And I think it's true. I mean, if people really buy the book and see some of the people who contributed to the book, it's like a diverse group of people. You've got artists, filmmakers, you've got academics. So it covers like a whole range of people who are involved in bringing different kind of discussion in terms of when we talk about Palestinian liberation. And I think it's worth reading and it's worth people getting a copy of. Ilan, Pappe, I think it's your turn. I don't see Ghada here, so I think the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Oh, I was able to unmute myself, which is wonderful. Thank you so much for the Palestine Solidarity Committee in South Africa for launching our book and for inviting us and to see so many good friends joining us, and hopefully also Ghada Karmi will join us. It's a great opportunity for Ramzy and myself to share with you our thoughts and the reasons behind the editing of this book and our hopes for its influence and impact. The Palestinian struggle for liberation takes many forms and is based on diversified modes of resistance. This struggle is usually and understandably described as a collective effort of a nation that was colonized in the late 19th century and is still under occupation and colonization today. Since the struggle continues, it is useless to make any reasonable judgment on its success or failure, as Ramzy pointed out, also about its solution. Far more important in our mind is to record and recognize the individual struggles that form this collective effort. They sometimes are forgotten, these individual attempts, or overlooked, but they are crucial for understanding why those who are part of the liberation struggle and those who support it have not given up hope for its eventual success in the future. It is also a key to the question, how did the Palestinians succeed in surviving for 100 years in front of a Western coalition that supported a political project that was meant to eliminate and destroy them totally. When we decided to record these individual stories of struggle for freedom and liberation, we first hoped to have a full picture of the personal contribution and experience of each contributor. But we have been fortunate enough to receive much more than that. Each individual tale has a biographical section that opens a window to a more distant or a more recent Palestinian past in the homeland or in exile. This is very much about what was lost as a result of the ongoing Nakba or ethnic cleansing of Palestine, as much as it is about what was regained by sheer resilience, steadfastness, and commitment. Take, for instance, our opening chapter by Hamdan Ta, that assesses the role of the Palestinian archaeologist and archaeology in the struggle for liberation. It begins with a glimpse into the life of a 12-year-old village boy on the day of the Israeli occupation of the West Bank in 1967. In a moving passage in the chapter, Hamdan tells us how this boy and later teenager became one of Palestine's leading archaeologists. It was his first encounter with the new oppressive reality imposed by the occupation that set him off to this incredible career. Even today, Hamdan has to struggle daily against an archaeological narrative of denial and erasure. This sinister campaign is not only done through distorting ancient historiography, but also by the production of a misleading discourse and the invention of deceptive vocabulary. Struggling against his misrepresentation of the past and the present realities in Palestine through language is an essential part of another contributor to the book, Ibrahim Oude. His life story and shows a professional commitment to that was focused on examining the role of discourse and language in the liberation struggle. This is a professional life devoted to countering a Zionist vocabulary that sustained the denial of the Palestinian existence from the very start. His professional activity was and is supplemented by what he calls ex-curriculum activity, because he is a university professor. Jointly, this twin effort is Ibrahim's particular mode of cultural resistance, which is performed day in and day out, and finally in this century, as he tells us, has produced some tangible and encouraging results. The public domain is influenced by this discourse, and it is mainly the media that disseminates it, hence the crucial role the media plays in the struggle for liberation. Our contributors who work in the media, and quite several of them do, tell us a life story that will encourage young Palestinians to follow suit and become influential journalists and media persons in the future. It seems that one trajectory that led our contributors to play such a role in the local and global media is their educational background. Their early life was shaped by education provided at home and at school. But in the Palestinian case, often one has to be self-taught and learn through sheer personal determination, as can be gleaned from the story of Qasem Ali Karfane. Qasem shares with us the moment he undertook the road to become one of Palestine's leading journalists. He's talking about a journey that was digging to the roots of my people, as he says, collecting their experiences of life, debating on political visions, disagreeing on ideology, religion, cultural construct. A very critical way of looking at education and becoming a critical person that in his mind is crucial for a successful liberation struggle. It was both formal and informal education that prepared him for the role as one of the leading journalists of Palestine in the future. And one such informal site for him and for many others was the Israeli prison, where the political education was completed. Many of our contributors dwelled on the choices they made in becoming deeply involved in the struggle of liberation. For example, Sama Abu Sharar ponders in this respect about choices Palestinians make in the struggle of liberation. And I quote, "We are often told that our life choices are those of our making. In the case of most Palestinians, I believe it is a luxury that we often dare not indulge in. Yet, as Samar's chapter shows, a destined role not chosen but accepted led to pioneering work in building media outlets and bastion of professional journalism, which secured at the center of people's awareness and cognition of the Palestinian plight, and in particular, shed constant light on the Palestinian refugees' right of return. The sense of belonging and recognizing your identity as a Palestinian due to historical circumstances occurs every day on the globe. This is illustrated by another contributor to our book, Anwar Majlouf, who tells the story that I'm not sure many of you know, of one of the best football clubs in South America, Club Deportivo Palestino. In the context of the liberation struggle, it is a tale of solidarity and support of a young footballer who has it all, but does not forget his roots, identity, and his nation through its most difficult times. His support will make sure that abnormal realities of occupation and colonization would not deny the joy and crucial importance of sport in Palestinian life and in future. Being a Palestinian out of Palestine for most of one's life does not diminish a bit one's commitment and contribution to the liberation struggle. This is something that comes very forcefully in our book. This is a struggle that is persistent and faces constant attempts to deny its legitimacy. Such a particular struggle is recounted by our contributor that I hope has joined us already, Ghada Karmi, who from the 1970s and the 1980s had to fight for the right to be heard in the most bizarre ways in which her reasonable and factual analysis of what was going on in Palestine was often defined as provocative or offensive, rather devoted and still devotes her life to ensure that Britain, where she lives, does not forget Palestine and its own role in its catastrophic history. This struggle abroad in the West is a daily, at times consuming part of one's life and identity, comes out clearly in another anecdote, opening the chapter of another contributor in the book, Randa Abdel Fattah, and it occurs in Sydney, Australia. As Ramzy mentioned, we have really we have a geographical scope that covers almost the whole globe, because the Palestinians were dispersed all over the world. So I'm coming back to Randa. Generation after generation, people live in Palestine that alternates between being here and there, as Randa beautifully comments when describing her particular struggle to defend her identity and her relentless wish to contribute to the struggle on the ground. And let me just quote another short section from her article. On the one hand, a claim by a Palestinian here to bear witness to what is happening in Palestine there. Remember, she's in Australia. On the other hand, a claim by a Palestinian child here to control that here, to keep what is happening in Palestine there, unquote. Australia is also the opening situ for another contributor of ours, Samah Sabawi, who begins a poetic journey into history and identity from the Redland coast of Queensland, visiting her aging father. It is where the history of Australian settler colonialism and its genocide of the indigenous population meets the story of the Zionist settler colonialism and its ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. The geographical and historical background are all the time consciously present in the life of a Palestinian woman who writes about and experiences daily the nexus between exile and trauma, and in the middle ponders on post-memory. This self-reflection helps Samah to challenge the erasure and the denial and pass that determination to the next generation. Palestinians draw courage, inspiration, orientation from different sources. One of the most important one is religion, whether they are Christians or Muslims. We have two such contributors next in our book that tell the liberation struggle from the point of view of religion. The first is the life story of Father Manuel Musallem. His biographical tale is a powerful antidote to any colonialist and apartheid regime's colonialist attempt of divide and rule tactics by driving a wedge between Muslim and Christians in Palestine, something the British had begun with and the Zionists continue. Theology of liberation is both Muslim and Christian. As the father writes, I will resist from religious standpoint stemming from the theology of my church and my strong conviction in this theology. Samuel Arian discusses Islam within a wider context of exploring the different parameters in which the liberation struggle can move forward without flinching in the face of difficult realities and current misbalances of power. The role of political Islam in the liberation struggle has been recognized by many. His chapter situates the struggle within a lifelong commitment of an intellectual who paid highly for his devotion to long terms in American prisons, including solidarity confinement. His intellectual reach is extraordinary, from deep knowledge of Western philosophy and profound knowledge of the Islamic visions and perception. Sami is not only looking at the past, he's viewing the future and believes in grand visions without which there is no hope for a proper liberation, a vision that is situated in Islam and much as it is in general human values of freedom and justice. Religion also inspired one of our youngest contributor, Hanadi Halawani. He's a young Jerusalemite Palestinian woman who is a moving spirit and inspiration behind the Palestinian youth determination to defend Jerusalem and Al-Aqsa Mosque. It is a tale of faith and religious devotion, but at the same time it highlights how children and young Palestinians are enrolled in such a struggle at a place where massive Israeli presence should have prevented any form of resistance, and yet it exists. Hanadi's struggle takes place in the classroom, on the streets of Al-Quds, and wherever she is when she is banished from Al-Aqsa by Israeli order. Faith in one's religion or nation, alongside incredible human courage, is what keeps the Palestinian political prisoners resilient and determined not to cave in to callous incarceration and denial of justice. One of our contributors, Khalida Jarar, was still in prison when this book was prepared and was denied the right of participating in the funeral of her beloved daughter, may she rest in peace, and to whom we dedicate this whole collection. From the way she tells about her trials and tribulation that was smuggled to us from the prison, one can begin to understand the power of conviction that keeps the political prisoners of Palestine steadfast in their ongoing commitment to the liberation struggle. All our contributors chose a route that inevitably demanded sacrifices and can end in martyrdom, imprisonment, or loss of home or one's career. The courage and resilience of those who have experienced the most brutal aspects of oppression is brought in this extraordinary piece by Jarar that was conceived within the four walls of an Israeli prison amidst torture and endless brutality. No self-pity, no hate, but just an incredible sense of commitment and show of resilience and hope. Popular resistance demands not only commitment and courage, but also organization, as discussed by another contributor, Jamal Juma. Jamal recounts the role of networking to which he contributes until today. In his chapter, he provides us with an overview of the popular struggle from above. Institutions, organizations, and networking were at the heart of the more successful years of the PLO struggle. They deemed lost for a while as a result of the events of 1982 and the Oslo fiasco, but as Jamal's chapters shows, are still there and have the potential to reignite and regenerate a more coordinated and organized successful uprisings in the future. Organized or individual struggle on the ground in occupied Palestine leads, as we have seen, to prison, and takes someone who was in prison to devote his life to defend other prisoners. This is Raji Sorani, one of Gaza's most famous human rights advocates, who kindly also contributed to our book. He tells us the story of how his own liberation struggle is daily appearances in local courts, regional courts, and international courts, defending Palestinians who do not receive even a modicum of justice when they are processed through the Israeli legal system. To be treated as equal is also a constant challenge to those who devoted their life to education. And here we have Rada Agil, an educator that shows us why daily presence in the classroom, in writing textbook, is also part of liberation. I will mention only a few other issues that are manifestation of how encompassing liberation struggle is, how diversified it is, and why it is the real liberation struggle that maybe we sometimes overlook because we focus on the political dissent within the Palestinian political system. We have people who work on architecture. We have people who work on folklore or on artisanship. We are having stories of activists from within Israel, among the 48 Arabs, who through singing, through acting, and through action within the civil society, show us that the liberation struggle is daily, consistent, and so on. We also have not forgotten the cinema and the movie, as well as the theater, and we pay respect to these venues and these media as being an important part of the liberation struggle, as is the work of psychologists and psychiatrists also joining us in this book. We even have environmentalists, Palestinian environmentalists, who connect the struggle for ecology with the struggle of liberation. In the last part of the book, we meet personal stories of liberation that are done vis-a-vis the international community, like the event we are doing here today. And with this, I would end. We have here moving stories by people who were involved all their life in the solidarity movement with the Palestinians, explaining in a very clear and lucid way what solidarity means. How does it relate to the people you show solidarity with? And how did they navigate through difficult times when there was political dissent in Palestine, where there were moments of low and ebb, and how they never lost their hope and never lost their commitment for the long struggle that they have already taken, with the willingness to continue that struggle in the future and pass it on to the next generation. Let me finish by saying the following. Armed struggle, different modes of cultural struggles, knowledge production, recruitment of resources, and support of mental and physical ailments caused by occupation, imprisonment, and colonization are all forms of struggle for liberation. The various individual stories in this volume do not cover all the aspects of this struggle, nor can they represent all the groups, locations, and generations that kept the liberation struggle alive. But even as a sample, it is a testimony for the human capital that Palestine was blessed with before the Nakba, and managed despite the ongoing catastrophe to regenerate and expand. One day, this human treasure will be employed for the benefit for everyone who lives between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean, and for all of those who were expelled from there over the years. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Ilan, and also basically giving us an overview of the different chapters and different contributors and what they bring to this book. I think we're still trying to get a hold of Ghada, but if she's still not in, Comrade Ronnie, I think the floor is yours.
Well, can I tell you, I've got a sharper eye than you, because
You do?
Ghada is present, and she's
Oh,
hiding
that's
under
good.
the name, I think, of her daughter, Dr. Sally. You'll see her there. So I really, my old friend Ghada, I'm sitting here waiting to hear from you, as everybody else is.
Salim, Roshan, can you please let Ghada in? I'm actually excited because I did read her chapter on the key to the end of Zionism, and how during the pandemic she decided to do an online class. around concepts and psychoanalysis. So I really am looking forward to her sharing with us that chapter.
I don't think Ghada is here. I understood that the person with the
excuse me. Sorry for the interruption. Hi, I'm Sally Karmi. This is true. Ghada Karmi is a relative of mine, but I wasn't able to get hold of her. So we have the same family name. She's a cousin for my father. But sorry for that confusion. But I'm so happy that I'm really joining in. So sorry, I had to barge in so that I would really clarify this. I was asked if I could get hold of her, so I sent her actually a Facebook message, but I get no reply. Sorry about that.
Thank you so much. This is why I like live book launches. You get these kind of things that you can't plan for. Ronnie, I know you were trying to to give her the platform, but I think
I did, yes. Okay, thanks.
It's
It's
your
such a
turn.
pity Ghada's not with us. But it's the most wonderful book, as Ramzy and Ilan have conveyed to us. In fact, I find it one of the most inspiring books, not only of Palestine, and it is incredibly inspiring about Palestine and its people and the struggle. The book clearly will show everybody who reads it that the victory of the people of Palestine in their just struggle against Israeli, Zionist, settler colonialism, racism, apartheid is going to happen sooner or later. And I'm not just stating that. Read that book. Ilan has made reference to the enormous quality of Palestinian people through the ages. And the book really exhibits this quite extraordinary, wonderful power and treasure of the Palestinian people. It's quite amazing. I am sure everybody present has seen this in so many different ways, in meetings, in demonstrations and protests, in educational occasions, in readings, in the Intifada, the resistance of the Palestinian people through the ages, from the 1936 strike and armed struggle. The book, of course, doesn't focus on that. There is history in the book aplenty, but of course the Intifadas, and especially the 1921 Unity Intifada, it goes by various names, the Ramadan Intifada of that year, in response to the ethnic cleansing of people in East Jerusalem. And note, as one of the writers in the book points out, it's ethnic cleansing there. It's not eviction, as sometimes people are used to using that term without quite thinking it out. It's ethnic cleansing. But the questions that arise, and perhaps I'll come back to this a little later, but just to flag it in perhaps a 10-minute or so contribution in response to what we've heard, I was just going to say that what I think we need to consider, and it'd be so interesting to get Ilan and Ramzy's response to the actual, what is being called a very significant turning point in the Palestinian struggle. And despite what everybody regards as very bleak and of course very difficult prospects that they face, that something is seen to be changing in the most dramatic way out of that uprising in May of 2021 and continuing to this particular time. So there's a sustainability of the resistance. And of course, it has reverted to forms of armed resistance. I'm not talking about the actions of, say, Hamas out of Gaza, but direct confrontation with Israeli security in the cities of of the entity, the Zionist entity. And that term comes up so many times in the essays that we read. But I did want to just say a few things in relation to the book itself, which is a marvel. And Ilan, of course, has given us some insight by referring to its 30 contributions. He doesn't refer to the very important contributions of both Ilan and of both himself and Ramzy. There are 28 others. And if I can just indulge by saying to both Ramzy and Ilan, my favorite one is that of Hanadi Halawani, if I'm pronouncing that heroic woman's name correctly. As a South African, and there are many references to our struggle, and Ramzy's made reference to that, but the creativity that we see emerging out of Palestinian resistance in all the forms, from of art, of armed resistance and archaeology, right through to the tapestry of Palestinian history, and through to the exposure and dealing with the myths of Zionism. But all those multiple aspects that Ilan has referred to. And this remarkable woman, Hanadi, is a teacher of the good book and the Quran. And she had sat there as a result of her grandmother's inspiration to her about the Quran, about the Palestinian story, about the history. And this has driven her in her life. And she's a very courageous and witty human being. Nothing can keep her down. And she recounts how she has taught so many women, not simply the reading of the book, but actually resistance, and how they have used the reading of the book, the teachings, the recitation of it, at the Al-Aqsa compound and the gates leading to it, to defy, to thwart, to create obstruction of all kinds to the invasion of those Israeli settlers who are protected by Israeli military and security, who beat these women time and again and drive them away, and they always return. And she has been in prison so many times and banished from Al-Aqsa, but returns and returns. And that steadfastness in that particular essay is absolutely outstanding. And it absolutely exemplifies every single essay in the book. I would also like to single out, and Ilan referred to Ibrahim Aoud's very, very important essay on the language of resistance. And he goes through the whole history from 48 and the PLO coming into existence, the armed resistance, etc., and the intifadas, and so on. And he points to the fact that despite the treachery of the Arab states, of the Palestinian Authority, and the defunct PLO, how there's this new situation which he perceives. And that is exemplified by what he points out to us, is the need for a vocabulary of resistance that goes with the events, that give rise to the language, which in turn embodies the events. And he brings out the great importance of it, because Ilan is somebody who has done so much in terms of your work on the anti-colonial struggle of the Holy Land of Palestine. And Ramzy, in his preface to this book and in all his teachings, one perceives in Ibrahim's writing that very importance. And what he does through the usage of a vocabulary of resistance is to show that very struggle against colonization, against racism, against apartheid Israel, and to the use of the various methods that the Palestinians have used in history. So he says in this that it's a liberation vocabulary that is needed. And I see in the writing, and particularly from both Ilan and Ramzy, but it's evident in all the essays, including Ibrahim's, how in lockstep with the rise in the struggle, the rise of consciousness and a national identity, goes the need for the precise vocabulary, so that he underlines for us all internationally, and for the Palestinians in particularly, how it's not a struggle of two sides to a conflict, finding a solution in peaceful coexistence. And of course, being used by Israel, by Zionism worldwide, by Western imperialism, led by the ruling class of the United States. That what is needed is that liberation theory, that vocabulary, that form of resistance in its multiplicity, which the book points out. And then let me also signal, and again it applies to what Ramzy and Ilan is doing, and presenting a new way forward, a new vision. And of course, that's the title that you find within this book. And that is the challenge in terms of language and what language encapsulates in actual practice on the ground, and what the world has actually fallen for, particularly the neoliberal world run by US imperialism and Western imperialism. And that comes down to the fact that what is required is Palestinians to liberate themselves, Palestinians to find the way forward, a vision provided in this book, and a vision that surely will come to fruition. And of course, within this book, there's reference, and Ilan writes the particular essay to the BDS movement, dealing with its prehistory and the attempts beforehand, the references to what South Africa had managed and achieved, and therefore side by side with the struggle of the Palestinians, and of course with an outreach in terms of one democratic state for all the people who are prepared to accept that, Christians, Muslims, Jews, and so on, within the historic Palestinian situation. So the book and the reference there, the essay of the One Democratic State, is of course by Ilan, Ramzy, and others, their colleague and one of the leaders towards the fulfillment of one democratic state from the river to the sea. And that's the article by Awad Abdel Fattah. So the book has so much to it, and I recommend it fully. It would be perhaps presumptuous of me, because I want this to come, Chairperson Mahlatsi, to you've got 25 minutes or so, a Q&A session with Ilan and Ramzy, but we would really, I'm sure I speak for others, like to have an insight into them. And I'll mention two aspects now. One is the practicality, the likelihood, the move towards one democratic secular state on all of what is Palestine. And then secondly, how they view that input of Ibrahim Awood's, in terms of the current situation, the new situation that many others are speaking about. And we're not saying it would be easy at all or come about overnight, but the long struggle for a resistance that must be the decolonization of apartheid Israel. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Comrade Ronnie. And Ghada is finally here, so I'm very excited to have her. If you guys see a shadow, unfortunately, we live in South Africa where there's load shedding, so I do have load shedding, so bear with me. Ghada, I think the floor is yours. And I think some of the things Ronnie has spoken about, even in your chapter, you talk about them, about what a democratic state would look like and the questions that we need to answer. And in your chapter, you touch on some of those things. So would appreciate to hear more from you.
You can hear me, yes? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
we can hear you very well.
Good, good. Well, first of all, I want to salute you for making this book launch possible. And of course, I salute all my colleagues on this panel and all the ones who contributed to the book. Well, in a way, you know, I want to sort of take off from where Ronnie Kasrils has ended, which is to describe what I wrote about in the book, which was to do with not so much the end point of the liberation, but how you get there. So now I assumed that there is an agreement that the one democratic state in place of the current apartheid Israeli entity, as Ronnie calls it, is the desirable end to all this tragedy and all the misery. But what I very much made my contribution about was how do you get there? Because throughout my activist life, which has been longer than I care to remember, the question of how do you do it has perhaps not received the attention that it needed, because the discussion was so much about where are we going, where are we heading, etc. So the issue of how once you've agreed an aim, it becomes really very important, and that was the issue in the contribution that I made. I don't think it's an accident that my vision, if you like, is tied up with my own background. I'm what is called the 1948 Palestinian. That means I was born in Palestine, and my family was driven out in 1948, and in our place, the State of Israel was set up. In our particular case, we ended up in the West, that is in London, so I was brought up exposed to the Zionist narrative, and the fact that everybody around me really believed this narrative and supported Israel. Very painful, really, for all of us in the position we were in. But it also, I think, how can I say, probably confirmed me in the view that there is only one way, one way forward. That the vision of liberation, if you like, was quite simply to regain Palestine, and that was it. Now, so then the issue was, how do you do it? And the PLO, coming at the time in the 1960s and 70s and being at the height of its importance and power, confirmed what I longed for, because it spoke about total liberation of the land, and therefore the fact that that Palestine would return, and then in time, you know, the PLO evolved and wanted to talk about the Jewish Israelis who were there. There is a community of settlers and their descendants, which cannot be ignored. And so the idea of the so-called non-sectarian one state in Palestine was born in 1969 and was discussed for a few years, but never came to anything. So for me, that I never thought anything else was possible or acceptable, really. And the rest of it, the two states, were all kind of slightly pathetic, makeshift solutions to a really serious problem. So from there, clearly I was in total accord with other colleagues in the striving for a one democratic state. But then, as I say, for me, the issue was one of how. How do you get there? If we are all agreed that that is what we want, really the question is, how do you get there? And I'm really quite obsessed by this, because although I'd appreciate and understand the efforts of colleagues and friends to work on within the various groups and organizations which are promoting the one democratic state, I appreciate their efforts. Nothing that I say should imply that I have anything but admiration and support for all those efforts. My problem really is, I think they're too slow. I think it would take a long time for us to get there. Time we don't have, because Israel is not lying idle. It's swallowing up Palestinian land, it's expelling Palestinians, it's not standing still. So how do we shortcut the whole thing? Well, I'm inspired, of course, by the model of South Africa. The fact that the issue of equal rights was paramount for South Africa, and it's paramount for us, because, as has been pointed out many times before, when we look at what is called Israel and what is called the occupied territories, we see really one state with one sovereign ruler, and that is the government of Israel. However, the government of Israel is an apartheid government. It rules roughly half the population in that area. It rules a population, half of whom have rights and have citizenship, and the other half have nothing. They don't have rights, they don't have citizenship. So it struck me as obvious that that is the starting point. The half that doesn't have any rights at all has to demand them, and has to create a campaign for a demand for equal rights, as other struggles have done in the past. That seemed to me to be the way forward. Now, I mean, let us imagine that such a thing takes off. It was very clear that a demand like that is very simple to understand. It's something world opinion can accept and can support, so that the whole obfuscation and the complications around Israel, Palestine, who is right, who's wrong, disappears when you can see that there's a whole disenfranchised people who are asking to be enfranchised. And that seems to me to be very straightforward. And so from there, I obviously let my imagination run with me. And so from a struggle for equal rights, which would be a pan-Palestinian campaign, meaning that the people on the ground are the spearhead, they're the front, they're in the vanguard. And everybody else, people like me and supporters like Ilan and others, help us to help them to attain equal rights. That struck me as being the obvious way forward. I know I haven't got much more time, so let me perhaps make some concluding remarks. Sensible as this idea seems to me, and clearly it is the way to get back the whole of Palestine, and the only way I can think of. With all those advantages, it's not going to happen either. So long as this obsession with the two-state solution and the fact that the Western world is sold on this idea, and many Palestinians, by the way, very much would like to see a Palestinian state that is, however small, that has no Israelis in it, that where they can be themselves. So long as that is the case, it's difficult to see that they would abandon all of that and say, this is no good, it's not working, we are going to down tools as far as the struggle for a Palestinian state is concerned, and we're going to start with this campaign demanding equal rights. I wish that I were wrong, but I don't think so. So on a slightly pessimistic note, I want to say that I hope, and very much in writing my essay in the book, and in other writings I've done on the same theme, I hope that the seed of that idea would land somewhere, where would land on fertile soil, where somebody would take it up, and we would then really start the real struggle to get back to the whole of Palestine. And that is the only liberation that I can think of.
Thank you so much, Ghada. That was a very eye-opening and important contribution you gave to us, something for us to think about, especially when we talk about liberation, especially when we talk about freedom and what it looks like. I'm sure a lot of people have a lot of questions, and to speak to our speakers and to share their comments or questions. The floor is yours if you have any questions for our speakers. Salim, do you have anything to add?
I hope I haven't silenced people. I was the last person to speak.
No, I don't think you silence people. I think sometimes you need a different perspective, even if it's a pessimistic one, so that people think. And I think Ronnie started it off by saying we need to start talking about the practicality of it. And I think you added to that conversation. So I don't think you shut them up. Maybe that's shy, I don't know. You can also leave your questions or comments in the chat box. I will look at them and I will read them to our panelists. Oh, we have Zahid Rajan who would like to speak. Oh, and then Salim. Let me go ahead, Salim, and then Zahid afterwards. And then I'll give it to our panelists to respond. Go ahead, Salim.
Ghada, you haven't silenced us. We're just taking it all in, all of the speakers, including you. There are many things to say, but very quickly, thank you, Ilan and Ramzy, and all the contributors, including Ghada, for a brilliant book. I totally agree with Comrade Ronnie. It's incredible, the vignettes of the organic intellectuals in the Gramscian sense that Ramzy talked about. I just want to pose one or two very quick questions. You know, there's a lot of emphasis in the book about the unity intifada. One of my students, one of the contributors to a special issue of a journal we're putting together, talks about the Intifada consciousness, and she starts her article with talking about Zakaria al-Zubaydah and his contribution to this consciousness, and she refers to it in the Paulo Freirean sense of consciousness, and how despite this fragmentation, and that's a link to the one democratic state that Ronnie and Ghada and others referred to, and how this has been a game changer. And what we see since the book has been published, perhaps Ramzy, Ghada and Ilan can talk about the new developments, the resistance we see, which cuts across political organizations as we know them, and how people are coming together to resist. I was really moved by Ghada's essay, An Equal Rights Campaign, Keys to the End of Zionism, and how she challenges, and she has been doing this for a long time, the Zionist mythology, wherever we find ourselves in many parts of the world. And, you know, maintaining this faith in the right to return, despite the attempts at erasure. And the second question, therefore, is around solidarity, because of those of us outside of occupied Palestine have a role to play. And I think Randa Abdel Fattah's essay is, her article is absolutely important. She talks about how to be a Palestinian is about creating an ethics of liberation rooted in fighting for justice, not as a transactional gesture, the kind of I scratch your decolonization back so you can scratch mine. It's something Robin Kelly from the US talks about often. We support the Palestinian struggle because it is an important struggle for liberation, not because we want something back. So I think Randa talks about how it embodies an unapologetic commitment to justice, truth-telling, dignity, and freedom, regardless of which part of the world you're in. Those of us who've been following the Brazilian elections saw Bolsonaro's partner wearing an Israeli flag when she voted. This is the issue, Mashlatsi, you are well versed in this, the use of religion, of right-wing Christianity to support Israel, and how we can fight back. It exists in Brazil, it exists in South Africa as well. So this is a shared threat we all face, a threat that ultimately supports white supremacy and Zionism. So I really want Comrade Ronnie, Ilan, and Ramzy and Ghada to speak to that solidarity and why we are really fighting ultimately racism, white supremacy, fascism as well. All of us really took what Ilan said about incremental genocide very seriously. We see it happening. He said this a long time ago. So please speak to those aspects and speak to the importance of solidarity and the role we in South Africa have to play. Thanks, Mashlatsi. Sorry, I took longer
Yes.
than I thought I would.
Now
Sorry.
I can't be like a dictator and tell people to cut it short because you started. Now I have to allow everyone. So he can go ahead.
Thank you, everybody, and delighted to be in this forum. And thank you, Ramzy, Ilan, Ghada, and all the great authors. Great to meet Ronnie again. Thank you very much for this book, and we look forward to reading it and look at current thoughts and debate. I've got two things to say, basically. I'm from Kenyans for Palestine and the Pan-African Solidarity Movement. We in Kenya have battled with this idea. We have spoken out a couple of times in terms of supporting a one-state solution. And we've had some pushback from the local embassy, and the thing to say is that no, this is the official UN position, and this is where you should be going. And I think we feel very strongly that that the two-state solution is dead, and there is no option, but to push for a united, democratic, secular one state in Palestine. So just like a comment from whoever in terms of what should be our approach. Can civil society and writers and the Palestinian current leadership speak out and say we stand for a one-state solution? What does it look like, and we can make it a mainstream topic? In Africa, in terms of our Pan-African Palestine Solidarity Network, we're trying to make the Palestine movement relevant by looking at the role of Israel on the continent, by focusing on Christian Zionism, on agribusiness, and other themes around that to sort of make it relevant to the African population, the whys, the Palestinian struggle and African struggle. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zahid. Enver Mutala, do you have something to add? And then I think I have a question in the box, and then I'll give it back to the panelists to respond. Okay. I think one of the questions was just, religious extremists on both sides feel the conflict and hatred. How do we go about addressing these issues going forward? That's it, in going forward. So to the panelists, anyone can start. Maybe I should say Ramzy, then Ronnie, then Ilan, then Ghada to speak.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, and to all the speakers that have spoken since my intervention.
Sorry, Ramzy, sorry about that. I thought Enver would unmute himself, but apparently then he needed permission. He just wanted to ask the question. So I just wanted you to have all the questions before responding.
Absolutely, go for it.
Go ahead.
Are you
Yes,
saying I should go ahead, Mslati? It's Enver.
Yes,
Yeah.
I can hear you. Go
Yes, well, thank you very much. Firstly, of course, to say a great deal of great gratitude for this launch and the wonderful presentations we've heard. I really want to ask Ghada to say a little more about her end point, about because I think what she was proposing is much more complex than certainly I have thought about in relation to the Palestinian question. So can she please say a little more, define it more clearly? What exactly are the contradictions within it that she's asking us to examine? Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Just from a marketing point of view, if Ghada says everything, nobody is going to buy the book. So we need Ghada to hold back just a little bit. But just very briefly, so I don't consume too much time and give space to the respected other speakers to address the same points. Absolutely, the point about that Salim raised about the unity intifada. In fact, an interesting thing happened that the book started before the unity intifada. The essays were being collected prior to what happened in May 2021. And I would say a good number of people contributing to the book, a good number of authors said, can I please revise or add to my contribution? Because clearly, all Palestinians everywhere, all the contributors felt that this is different. This is not your everyday Israeli war. There was an earth-shattering event that took place, and an event that can only be compared to the first Intifada, in particular 1987, and the popular mobilization that happened then, and the sense of unity that took place among Palestinians, but also to the 1936 strike and rebellion of 3 years, where there was also that kind of common sense of purpose and kind of going back to the drawing board in every possible way, kind of revisiting the language, the slogans, the expectations, the relationships between all Palestinian communities. Something extraordinary has indeed took place during that time. And that really was was accentuated so very clearly by many of the authors in the book. I have made this argument, and I make it again, that intifadas do not liberate land, but they liberate people. People liberate land. And that's what happened in the 1987 Intifada. It didn't, in fact, unfairly, historians often talk about how the momentum died out in the end, and that sadly resulted in the Oslo Agreement. So it kind of started with a bang and ended with a whimper sort of scenario, but it really is not so simple as that. The generation of that Intifada, I was a member of that generation, and that generation has contributed to the Palestinian discourse and the Palestinian struggle in numerous ways. Their degree of success in academia, in the fields of medicine, engineering, law, and so many other areas is really unparalleled compared to many other generations. So there's that awakening that happens to us as people. We get inspired at an individual, but also at a communal and at a popular level. And that means something. And that's worth considering as well. And I truly felt that moment took place again in May 2020, there's this growing consciousness. I was in a discussion hosted by a Sharq center regarding this, and a professor from Oxford, a fantastic academic, argued with me that my references to rebellion are too premature. This is not a rebellion. We really don't know what's going to happen. And I argued to the contrary. Judging by previous Palestinian experiences, we know that the events of May 2021 were only the beginning of something much bigger. And we see that. We see that, and we've written about this, and we argued for that. What is happening in Jenin, in Nablus, the Lions Dens, the Hebron brigades, the Nablus brigades, all of this new rebellion that is forming in the West Bank, all of this is an outcome of what actually happened in May 2021. And we don't know where this will go, but we know that we are at the cusp of a major transition taking place in Palestine. The Israelis are aware of it. The Palestinian Authority is aware of it. Other parties are aware of it, and they are preparing for it, and they are worried about the consequences of this rebellion. Regarding the issue of solidarity, in a way, I am as much as I admire the solidarity movement and impressed by the vast growth in its dimension and outreach, as much as I worry about the approach to solidarity with the absence of a centralized Palestinian strategy. I don't blame ordinary activists around the world for being placed in this position in which there is no single Palestinian political entity that speaks for Palestinians, but in a way that opened up the space for a lot of people to speak on behalf of Palestinians because of the lack of that centralized Palestinian strategy. And we've seen this discussion and debate happening everywhere. Just in my recent tour in Norway, the same question was raised over and over again. We don't want to work with the Palestinian embassy, but on the other hand, it's the only entity that legally represents Palestinians, and so forth and so on. So what do we do? So there's that issue. And because of that, many solidarity groups tend to kind of try to navigate the little margins and little spaces. And at the end of the day, some of these efforts might not be convincing. And my answer is listen to the Palestinian people, not to the political parties per se, not to the Palestinian Authority, not to the Palestinian embassy or office in your country, but to the Palestinian people, those rising in Nablus and Al-Khalil and Jenin and Sheikh Jarrah, and of course throughout Gaza and the rest of Palestine and Palestine 48, South Lebanon and so forth. These are the Palestinians you engage with. And yes, we do have representatives. And yes, we do have grassroots organizations. And yes, we have our own real intellectuals who speak for us and speak on our behalf. So no, there's a lot of space in which you can engage with Palestinians without going through the same old tired argument that we've been dealing with since Oslo in 1993-94 of who represents Palestinians. Solidarity is with the people, not with the Palestinian embassy. So it's time to do a little bit of redefinition. Very, very quickly, this whole extremist on both sides, I mean, we know where this language comes from, right? We know where it comes from. It comes from Washington. It's a Western kind of phrase where, you know, they are willing to make some compromises as far as engaging some Palestinians, the good Palestinians, the moderate Palestinians, again, the Palestinians we can do business with, but not those other bad extremist Palestinians. But of course, it has nothing to do with extremism on the Palestinian side. There is a difference, and I'm going to try to be very, very brief regarding this. There's a difference between a settler coming from Brooklyn or Kiev or London and taking over my land in the name of whatever religious or spiritual ideas or ideals he or she believes in, and my grandfather fighting according to whatever form of reference or frame of reference he has. The Palestinian socialist fights in the name of socialism. The Palestinian peasants, the Fallahin, used you know, what they could relate to in terms of their heritage and culture and spirituality. That's not extremism. Just because Palestinians make references to Islam and to jihad and that sort of thing, it doesn't make them extremists. It makes them in touch with their reality. But you can't possibly compare this with a group of people coming from elsewhere with guns and rifles and dedicate to the process of the very erasure of the Palestinian people. So I think it's quite unfair to even make such a suggestion, considering that extremism, that all Zionists are extremists, including the so-called leftist and cultural Zionists. They are all extremists, and they are supported by the most extreme political elements of the West. The evangelicals and the imperialists in the US and in Europe and so forth, and the far right in Europe and so forth and so on, until Bolsonaro that Salim just mentioned. I think that's it for me, and the question that Anwar has raised pertains to Ghada's essay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramzy. Ronnie, Ilan?
Hello.
Yes, Ronnie, do you have any contributions to add to the questions or comments?
Okay, I thought I had lost you all because I've got a blank screen. Let me just say two things then. I'll try and be very quickly. Salim raised the question of solidarity and asked us our approach to it. Let me just say that the most wonderful example that we can refer to in relation to our discussion this evening is the Unity Intifada, the Ramadan Intifada of May 2021, because the Palestinian people who were supposed to be fragmented and separated by the Zionist project came together in such tremendous solidarity. It shattered the myth of Israel that the Palestinians were non-existent as a national people, and the solidarity was sparked by the struggle of the people of East Jerusalem to stay where they were in their legitimate homes. And we saw how, in the first place, people from around East Jerusalem, and then from within Israel itself, from the occupied territories, from Gaza and the West Bank, from the diaspora, how they all showed the solidarity, their national solidarity in being. That's where solidarity starts. And this is what we need to emulate in relation to our commitment to the Palestinian people. Those of us in the international community behind the great campaign of boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And then my second point just relates to the question of the possibility of one democratic state. I know it's in its infancy in the sense of the way it's now been brought onto the agenda in very recent times and is still with a small grouping of people who have had the courage to attempt to put it back on the agenda. And of course, like Salim, I really listened to the eloquence of Ghada and how she would want to see that, but doesn't feel that it's possible. And Palestinians know this more than us. But, you know, if I could just say this and remind us of the necessity of the vocabulary of liberation, because the Palestinians had this until the awful diversion of the Oslo Accords, and everything went downhill with that. The idea of accepting a mere 20% or so, and it's far less, fragmented portions of the West Bank. But the Palestinian goal had always been before that for a one democratic, secular Palestine from the river to the sea. That was what we all subscribed to in the international community. I'm talking about the African independent states and the South African and other liberation movements, and many out there in the international community. We were behind, we could understand the Palestinians striving against the dreadful racist colonial settler enterprise and project. And that had support. It was the dominant concept. It was given away. And when that happens, it's downhill. It's a slippery slope. And it's very difficult to regain the footing and the traction, but it's so necessary. And if I might say to Ghada and everybody, the thing about the South African struggle, one of the key things was that the liberation movement never ever succumbed to giving in to fragmentation, to the offer of Bantustans, etc. It's so important to stand firm on your unified country. And this is why the appeal of one democratic state, I believe it can gain traction. It's obviously up to the Palestinian people, but you know, we've all seen that the two democratic state solution is just an awful trap, and it's getting nowhere. It's as dead as a dodo, and that's what's holding back the Palestinian people.
Thank you, Ronnie. Ilan, then Ghada.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, can you, yeah, I am unmuted. Thank you all for your very important questions and comments. On the question of the impact of what was called the Ramadan Intifada or the Unity Intifada, I think that we have a tendency to look at new uprising with the same eyes we looked at the previous uprising. And this is a mistake. The second Intifada didn't look like the first Intifada. And the third Intifada, which I think we're already in the third Intifada, is different from the second one. So far it has two stages. The first stage was in May 21, a show of force that Palestinians in Haifa, in Gaza, in the Nakab and in the West Bank are united in their rejection of Israel, regardless of political affiliation and political fragmentation. This second stage is an interesting one because it is a struggle to show the Palestinian Authority that its main argument that there is no point in resisting the Israelis because of the balance of power. This is the main purpose of what's going on today in Jenin, Nablus, Hebron, and so far. The next stage is after the Israeli election, and I think it will focus on the Palestinians inside Israel. We will have an incremental intifada here, which will not be one bang or one revolutionary outburst of power and resistance, but is very much tied into the realization also by international NGOs such as Amnesty that the whole political struggle has moved into an anti-apartheid struggle inside historical Palestine. So whether you are a Palestinian in Haifa, or you are a Palestinian in a refugee camp, or you are a Palestinian in the occupied West Bank or the besieged Gaza Strip, you are part of a movement that, regardless of its ability to create an authentic political leadership or not, is not giving in to the political structure that has been built since 2000 and now has come into fruition. And I predict that this coming election today would institutionalize this apartheid state even further. And I think this is very important to understand that I was fortunate enough to be on the ground in Jenin, in Nablus, Jerusalem recently, and it's so clear that there is no reflection whatsoever for the politics from above to the politics from below. No reflection whatsoever. The young people who are brave enough to resist the occupation are there according to localities and definitions which have very little to do with party affiliation and so on. And I think we are in the midst of it. Of course, it's a very precarious situation. The Israelis are going to use all the power that they have, but I think that there are many discrete processes that we have to look at to understand the connection between the realization from the outside that Israel is an apartheid state, not just by Ronnie and myself. I'm talking about by large sections of the public opinion, and the hypocrisy shown by the world towards the question of Palestine in comparison to the support to the Ukrainians or to the people of Iran. I think this is all connected in a sense that Palestine is at the midst of a struggle of liberation that has been going on for years, but has been unfairly reframed and yet has a strong support among the civil society in the world. So that's the first point. The second point, I think that it's as far as the solidarity movement is concerned, I think what Ramzy said is very much to the point, but I think that's one of the reasons the boycott, divestment and sanction movement was so powerful, because it did not require any navigation. It was pure solidarity without analyzing who is representing the Palestinian and who is not. This was not directed towards the Palestinians. This was directed towards the apartheid, oppression, ethnic cleansing, and so on. And finally, I would like to make a point that what we've seen in the last 5 or 6 years is that, unlike in the 1970s, the realization that colonialism is not only a feature of the past, but is definitely a relevant term to describe how Britain relates to its minorities and to asylum seekers and refugees, how America treats its inner cities, how it treats African Americans and the First Nations and so on. The realization that actually anti-colonialism is a global struggle that still continues, and that Palestine is such an important part of that struggle, I think created an intersectionality in the solidarity movement that has never been there before. And there is this gap, as there is the gap in Palestine itself, between political elites that are either timid or bought by Israel, and including in the Arab world on the one hand, and the societies that see their own struggle against injustice and their own location is strongly related to the struggle against injustice in Palestine. I'm part of a movement which is called the One Democratic State movement in Palestine. Actually, we're called the One Democratic State Initiative and not a movement, because we are just calling for discussing the issue rather than trying to become a political party. And I can tell you that this is a movement that gains momentum with every passing day. It's very clear to people that this is the only way to talk about the situation and to look for ways of decolonization, not through more partition, creation of Bantustans and so on, but through, even if it's a long struggle, for proper decolonization and liberation. And this is the moment where you feel that a young boy in the Jenin refugee camp, and as Ramzy calls them, organic intellectuals, maybe in Nazareth or in Jaffa, are speaking the same language. They're speaking the same language of anti-colonialism, of decolonization. Do they have the power to do it themselves? The answer is no, but they have the power to stay resilient, steadfast, and to hope that international and regional solidarity would come in time to make sure that their struggle would be successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilan. Ghada, the floor is yours.
Yes, thanks very much for those questions, and it's very interesting the kind of close attention that people are paying to this issue. Let me see if I can make a few points in answer to the things that have been raised. First of all, the question of the struggle that's happening on the ground in Palestine now. Clearly, this was always inevitable. To me, it is inevitable. And even if the Israelis crush this one, another will take its place. It's completely inevitable. It's what's to be expected in the situation where you have a colonizer who is quite unable to evolve their political thinking, quite unable to adjust to different situations, and continues with the same mindset. So, of course, it's what's going to happen. And I am quite certain and clear in my own mind that the solution will come from the struggle on the ground. It won't be me or other activists who will bring this about. It's the people on the ground who will create that reality. They will lead the movement towards a solution. And in terms of the role of solidarity groups and people, that's something that has to be clear to them too, that the support has to be for whatever helps the people on the ground in their struggle. And I know that a lot of that is happening already, but it's just to clarify really that's how it is. That same applies to the position of civil society on this issue. Of course, Palestine is iconic. It is an icon, and it's become a symbol of injustice, of oppression, of the way that dominant forces attempt to subjugate and enslave people who are weaker. It stands for all of that. And all the people in the world who've known this sort of struggle or who accept it intellectually will, of course, always support the Palestinians. I totally agree with Ramzy about this religious, the fanatics on both sides type thing. I just wanted to make an observation here. You know, the thing that has made this, made religion appear as some kind of motive in this fight is really Israel. Is really Israel. It's Zionism. It's the use of religion, religious symbolism, religious references that has, in a way, infected our side. So that after a long time, this was not the case for decades, when the Palestinians were very clear that they were fighting an invader, a colonizer assisted by an imperialist power, very clear about that. There was no talk of religion as being a motivating factor. But with time and this persistent message that came from the Zionists, that the reference point was religious, because after all, what is a Jew? You know, how do you define a Jew? You have to define it in a religious sense. So that kind of, in my opinion, seeped into the consciousness of some people on the Palestinian side. And they became converted to the idea that religion is relevant here, and that it's a motivating factor, and so on. This is just a comment I wanted to make. Finally, in answer to Enver and the question of the equal rights struggle, in putting this forward, I'm extremely aware that that many people reject this idea, not least Palestinians, for whom the idea of asking for living together with the oppressor is very, very hard. It's very hard to take. And the idea, which is also implicit in what I'm putting forward, that you will have to, as Palestinians, on the ground, you have to when making a demand for equal rights and for political rights, the political rights include and mean equal citizenship. So there's a phase in which Palestinians become citizens of the state of Israel. So I'm not sure what is complicated about this. The demand is clear. I don't think it's difficult to understand. A people who are disenfranchised demand of their ruler, the ruling government, saying, I need rights. Like, you cannot go on ruling me like this. I think that's quite simple to understand. Where the complications, of course, arise is in the acceptability of the idea in the way that you prepare for it. And elsewhere I've written about the fact that you don't just produce this idea and walk away. You have to talk about a program towards it being realized. And that will include education, it includes promotion of the idea, it includes a lot of preparation to get people to see what the advantages would be of pursuing that kind of strategy. It would also mean that you might have to approach the current Palestinian Authority and offer them or put to them the idea that they would lead such a movement, that instead of trying to continue in the role that they've already got, which is unpopular and which they know it, that to consider at least converting from the current idea of a pseudo-state of which they're the head to being a leadership for an occupied people. There are many other ideas like that, but this is not the space. We don't have the space or time for me to expand on them. I don't know if that satisfies you, and so this is as well as I can put it here.
No, I think you've covered it very well. Before, I think we've run out of time, but before I close, I would like to ask the speakers if you guys have any closing remarks before I close the session. And thank you so much to the audience for some of the questions we didn't get to, but I'm sure based on the speakers' contributions and responses, you may have been covered. So Ronnie, Ramzy, Ghada, do you have any closing remarks? Ronnie, you're speaking. Can you unmute yourself, please? We can't hear you.
Okay, yeah, my screen's gone blank, so I'm flying blind. I just wanted to say thanks to everybody who's participated, and especially Ramzy, Ilan, and Ghada, who were so fascinating to listen to. And the key message from me to everybody here is buy the book. It's absolutely brilliant. It's a wonderful inspiration to read through it, and one will gain so much from it. Thank you.
Thank you very much on behalf of me and Ramzy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think Ronnie took my idea that I was going to finish with, which is buy the book. So please do. Thank you, everyone.
I was still going to add to that before my closing. Ghada, do you have anything to add?
Thank you, Malaste. Thank you.
Look, I can only echo what colleagues have said. I think really my hope is that a book like this acts as a provocation to thinking again about this whole terrible story, which people keep hearing about and are not quite sure about, and that this book should be the spur to understanding it more and to thinking about it and contemplating it.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to basically steal Ronnie's words and say, buy the book. The book is Our Vision for Liberation, Engage Palestinian Leaders and Intellectuals Speak Out. You can buy the book on Amazon for about $29, but PSC is trying to pull some strings to get us the book on a discount. But if they don't, still, please buy the book. Most of us do buy stuff from Amazon. I'm sure we can buy the book. One of the most important things I think we've enjoyed about this launch has been about how we speak about liberation. And I think it's an interesting way in which we've been talking about it, but hearing from different Palestinian contributors speaking about it and how they see liberation for Palestine is actually interesting, but most importantly, gives us as activists something to look forward to, then also looking at the past and also changing the discourse. And also moving away from continuously asking Palestinian speakers, writers, and intellectuals when they come about always obsessing what the solution is and always asking them whether two-state or one-state. I think where we are is we want a one democratic state. And the only way to do that is to show solidarity and stand solidarity with Palestinian and continue to raise our voices. And when Palestinians speak, we amplify those voices. And this book does that, in that you have Palestinian contributors speaking about their experiences, about their memories, about how they see Palestine. And I think our contribution also as activists in South Africa and all over the world would be buying this book and showing that we stand in solidarity, but most importantly, we're willing to listen to the voice of Palestinians, not just political leaders, which we know. And I think everywhere around the world, we know that leaders have failed, especially when it comes to politics. So I think moving forward, we show solidarity by actually doing something. So just dropping $29. I know things are hard, but $29 you can, and just get the book. So with that, thank you so much to all my speakers and the audience for staying with us and listening and engaging with us. And I think this was a fruitful conversation, and Thank you so much. And for those who still want to be involved with the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, like I said, leave your details in the chat box and we'll get in touch with you. And if you want to know what else we are planning as the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, we will let you know. So leave your details and we'll get in touch with you. With that, thank you so much to everyone. Bye.